Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator podcast. I'm delighted to welcome Will Fraser to join us today. A one-club man, spent his whole career playing with Saracens. Unfortunately, as we'll no doubt discuss, his career came to an end earlier than he would have liked due to injury. But before we jump into that, Will, thank you very much for sharing your time with us today. Now, we're going to be talking about transition. We're going to be talking about life after sport. But just to give people a little bit of a flavour and an insight into who you are, we always like to ask our guests to pull out one or two memories. You know, you had a fabulous chapter of your life at Saracens. If you had to wind the clock back and pull out a couple of matches or occasions or scenarios that bring you a sense of pride when you reflect on them, what comes to mind, Will?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me on. In terms, well, I mean, the obvious one is straight off the bat, isn't it? The double winning season. So 2015-16. So for all the reasons everyone listening to this can probably guess why that stands out. I think for me personally, as we'll no doubt get into, I probably spent more minutes of my career under Jen than I actually did on the pitch. So I'd missed a lot of the finals the club been involved in before that point. So that European final was the first kind of final that I'd really been able to get my teeth into and play the Filati in. So winning that was amazing. Then yeah, a couple of weeks later to back it up with the Premiership win was awesome. So that stands out. And then the other one, there are a number of games that stand out. I suppose you probably go back to the start, my debut. It was, gosh, which year was it? 2012, I think, or 2011 potentially. And we played Leicester away at Welford Road. First start, as you remember, you come down that stand through the crowd.
Yeah.
And I remember I had this weird thing where my nerves always manifest themselves in different ways. For some reason, if I got super nervous, I started crying.
Right.
So I was in the change room before, and I was fine, but I just, some people throw up, some people talking all sorts of rubbish. For some reason, I started crying. So I started getting really emotional. I'm standing at the top of that stand about to run, and all these people look around me. Who is this young kid? Like, is he okay? Like, I just see in their face, like, what has happened to this kid in the changing room? He's crying, running onto the pitch. But we put 50 points on them. So that was.
Oh well, there you go.
Yeah. Just that turned it around quite quickly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those two definitely stand out.
I like it, and you know, that's a different one. I've played and been around a lot of players that unfortunately throw up. But yeah, but that's it. Did that, just out of interest, did that dissipate through your career, or were you regularly finding yourself that the nerves were leading to that sort of raw emotion and the tears flowing?
So I managed to control it, but the emotion was always there. So I think, and I am also the only person I know that's happened to as well. So you're not, no, I think to begin with, I say my whole career was in, so I kind of battled quite hard just to get onto the pitch. So I built things up quite a lot in my head, particularly for games, and the first half of my career was very much that. It was just this emotion would bubble up, and I struggled for a while to kind of not control it, but just understand it and all that kind of stuff. And then the second half of my career, I kind of managed to get my head around it, get to grips with it, and some big events happened in my family life off the pitch that I think had a big kind of subconscious role in that. And then it was just knowing myself well enough to know, cool, how do I kind of mitigate this as much as possible? How do I understand actually? How do I flip it and look at it as a sense of enjoyment and excitement as opposed to this kind of, oh my goodness, I'm about to run out and do this amazing thing, the pressure, all that kind of stuff. So I probably just got my head around it and then I finished playing.
Yeah, just in time. Just in time. But no, I was only curious to ask you that follow-up because it is the first time I've heard of that. But it's an interesting one of dealing with pressure, because we'll talk about transition as we explore all the different topics, and being able to deal with nerves and adjust and handle your emotions. I think sportsmen and women are generally very good at that. So before we jump jump forward though, Will. It's interesting. Obviously, that fabulous memories, and to win the double, many people spend their whole sporting career and don't win anything. So that
Mm.
season, naturally, I knew winning the league title, those trophies was going to be something you mentioned. Just give us a flavour for what you are currently doing now in your life after
Mm.
sport. What's Will engaged in now?
So currently I'm 4 years into having my own business. So 101st, which is a people and culture consultancy. So 4 years into that, 9 months into starting that business, very ignorantly and naively, we decided to set up a charity as well, the 101st Foundation. We work in prisons and pupil referral units, trying to help drive some really positive outcomes in a couple of spaces that are often forgotten about in society. That's about 3 years old now. So got those two bits. Very accidentally, but very gratefully, became a co-founder of another business called Pineapple, which is a people data within hospitality, and obviously, involved with the awesome bits that you guys are doing, and a couple other, little bits and bobs here and there. But 101st and the 101st Foundation is my mainstay, and then kind of Pineapple is something else kind of bubbling away.
Love it. Well, I'm going to come back to that from an entrepreneurial perspective, but Carl, I know you'll want to dive in here and just explore this a bit further with Will.
Yeah, I want to just dig into the period of actual transition
Mm.
because James touched upon it at the beginning, and it would just be lovely to get your insight into it a little bit more. Unfortunately, you had to retire because of injury, and just love to dive into that into a little bit more depth because what I'd love to understand in was that decision sort of over a period of time and you were
Mm.
given some information and these are the facts, this would be our advice, what you do with this is your decision, or was it more of a case of your doctor, your surgeon was saying you are done, you can't continue with the way you are? Just give us a little bit of an insight into that.
Yeah, it was entirely the latter.
Okay.
Um, so as I said, obviously semi jokingly, but my whole career was kind of littered with injuries. So it was always a bit of a struggle for me to put a run of games together. I don't think again, my relatively short career, but I don't think I ever actually completed a whole season, without, in 9.5, 10-year career, I had 10 operations and various other bits and bobs along the way, a couple of surgeries post playing. And so I'd always known that my career was probably going to be shorter than when I first started. I'd had the grand plans that I'd be finishing playing now at 35. That was the master plan. And then I thought, right, well, in reality is my body's not holding up great. If I can get to 30. So I think at this point I was 26. I just signed a new contract with the club that would have taken me through to about 30. And I thought if I can see this contract through, get to 30, I'd be unbelievably happy with that. And if another contract comes up off the back of it, great. If not, I can make peace and be happy with where I've got to. Um, and then it was in a training session, actually.
Ugh.
It was a Prem, I think what is now the Prem Cup. I can't remember what it's called when I was playing. And we were training against Ealing. They came and kind of trained against us for the week. And we're doing a scrummaging session. And I was a flanker, just kind of put my head into, not to get super noisy, but to help the prop, do that cool stuff. And I thought I'd crick my neck. Your neck. And so you're walking around kind of the rest of the week a bit like this. Played a couple games and I got under the bench press and I couldn't lift a lot anyway. But I brought the weight down and then only one arm kind of went up, and I just couldn't get any power out of my right arm. And obviously, I was like, well, that's not normal. Went to the physio, went and had some scans. Anyway, it transpired that I slipped a disc in my neck and got a bleed on my spine.
Oh,
And so that pressure on the nerve, I couldn't generate any power through my right arm. And so it was one of these ones where, as you guys have played the sport, and neck injuries are, you'll be pretty cautious around them. So we gave it 6 months. Yeah, did all the rehab, everything we could. Had another scan, went to his surgeon, and nothing had really changed. And he just very kind of clearly said, we could operate, but one, you want to avoid neck surgery like the plague, and two, it's not actually going to massively improve your chances of getting back on the pitch. So really, the decision is to finish now or finish now. It was kind of one of those ones. So at the time, it was as you'd imagine, yeah, pretty devastating.
yeah.
even though I'd gone into it knowing that was probably the outcome, but it's one thing to think it and to hear it. But in hindsight, in a way, it was probably the best way for it to happen in the sense that I didn't have a choice.
Mm.
Yep.
Because again, I think half the trappings that professional sports people fall into is if there's a choice, finish now or give it another go, 99.9% are going to give it another go. And it's often that extra little bit is where either more damage gets created or you miss an opportunity where you can finish on your terms, you got stuff going on outside, whatever it might be. So as much as at the time and for a good couple of years, like it would, it took me a while to get my head around it. I'm nearly 9 years out now. And in that, looking back, it was probably the best way for it to happen to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit more I'd love to unpack in that. But firstly, James and I, we both played rugby, but I was a fly half, so I spent my life running from you big boys. I didn't have any neck injuries. I was nowhere near that
No,
stuff.
no,
Avoided you boys like the plague. Um,
I wasn't very quick, so you would have been easy to
I've been
avoid
all right.
me. So, yeah, you've been golden.
Perfect. So, I mean, you mentioned in hindsight having been told this is it, this is
Mm,
you done, was the best way for this to happen.
mm,
And you mentioned if there's that 1% chance most athletes are going to make that decision to, I'm going to try and
mm,
I'm going to see. And I suppose that's, in a little sense, that's where ATA comes in terms of if those athletes have prepared and they have a bit of knowledge about what's going to come after this,
mm,
those that have that maybe 1% may make a different decision, decide, actually, do you know what? For preservation purposes, I've got this going on. I'm just going to make this decision and step out now because I'm
mm,
comfortable knowing what I'm going to do. But you also mentioned that you went through basically a 6 month period of rehab
mm,
prior to seeing the surgeon and then being
mm.
told this is done. During that 6 months, did it ever cross your mind that this might be it, or were you fully focused on I'm going to be back, I'm going to do everything possible to return?
Initially, it didn't. No, initially I was like, I'm 100% getting back.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the start of any injury rehab process. You always go in with the blind optimism. I say blind optimism, actually, that's too harsh, but with the optimistic point of view of this is going to come right, this, that, and the other. It was probably about 3, 4 months in when we just weren't really seeing any progress. I wasn't really able to do anything. I wasn't even getting back to like running around and stuff like that. So I think then it starts to kind of dawn on you, and I had the rest of my body was pretty shot as well. So then you start kind of bringing it all together and start thinking, right, well, actually, there is a possibility of this, and I had the brilliant physio at the time and the medics at the club, and just the club in general. So I if I need to go and have a conversation with someone beforehand, then I did that, and I had that available to me. But there was an element of kind of also not prepping me for it, but it's a possibility, like
Yeah.
so you're not completely blindsided by it. But yeah, I'd say initially it was entirely this isn't going to be an issue. Well, the first few weeks before we had the scan, I played. I thought I just cricked my neck.
Yeah.
Yeah, of
That was the
course.
thing. Like I it didn't even cross my mind that it was something that could end it. Um, so yeah, so it was a funny one. But then again, it's like anything that you can prepare yourself for the worst, but until the actual event kind of happens, you just don't really know how you're gonna deal with it in that moment.
Yeah. And been at such a young age, 27,
Mm.
28-ish at this period, had you actually had any thoughts about life beyond rugby? Were there plans in place? Did you have other passions or the purposes that you were diving into? Or was this a case of Will's the
Mm.
rugby player? I have to finish now, unfortunately. Now what? Who am I now? I'm leaving this world.
A bit of everything. So
Yeah.
as I say, when I got to 26 and I'd had that thought in my head, if I can see this contract through, then I'm golden. By definition, that wasn't that far in the future, the end of that contract in reality. So I'd begun to think about, so what happens if I don't get a new contract or yeah. Um, but I didn't know what that was at all. So I just massively oversimplified it and just went, right, I'm just going to try as many things as I can under the premise that I'm going to hate it. But if I hate it, it means I can cross it off the list.
Yeah.
So if I do enough things theoretically, whatever's left on the list should be things that I would relatively enjoy, could get my teeth stuck into because I've got rid of everything else. So that was the plan. Now, obviously, I only got a year into that plan, so I didn't I didn't try out a huge amount of things. So I got to that point and was a bit like, wow, what do I do now? But this is where, and Carl, we've spoken about it before. I was I consider myself unbelievably fortunate, um, and the beneficiary of serendipity to the extreme. Because most people in that situation have to go on this massive journey, and go through some pretty torrid employment experiences and interviews and identity, all that kind of stuff. I fortunately didn't have to do that because the club basically gave me a job the day after I retired. So I remember I announced to the lads that I was finishing in a team meeting. The lads went out and trained. The following day, I started my new job, and it was literally like that. So,
What was
so I
that
don't.
role, Will? What were you doing?
So the role was to start up. So the club had this idea for a while, kind of back end of my playing career, that a few former, so Hugh Vivian, Neil de Kock had kind of built the foundations of themselves. Of we'd made very public, the rise of the club and the culture that underpinned it and all the stuff that everyone kind of knows about Saracens. And it was then going, well, how can we actually translate this into to other teams and other organizations in different industries? So Vivs and Cocky had gone away and essentially built this foundation of a business. But by nature of kind of what else they're going on in their lives, and that's Cocky was still playing at the time, and they didn't have the capacity to dive into it full time. And essentially, at the point where I finished, this idea was kind of the forefront of the club's mind, and it kind of just is like the star aligning type thing. Yeah, it was the perfect opportunity whereby I'd been at the club since I was 14. I'd lived and played through that period of change, been that kind of core part of that core group of players that had gone through it, and the lads that have gone on to do exceptional things off the back of it. And as you can tell from this, for whatever reason, I like to talk. So so it kind of made sense. So they essentially just gave me this idea and this foundational thing, said, run with this, and it's kind of a win-win because if you can create and build something out of it, obviously that's great for you and it's another line of revenue for the club. And if it doesn't work, then it's no harm, no foul, and hopefully you've learned something through experience. So that was it. Yeah, day after finished, I was straight on the kitchen table, kind of trying to build out this consultancy business for the club, which I ended up doing for a couple of years, and that was kind of the precursor to what is now 101st.
Exactly, and that's what I didn't know that segue, so that's interesting. You got
Mm,
that insight, you got that experience, and again, just pulling
mm,
out a couple of reflection points, Will, which are so powerful. And we always love to hear these stories because we don't know exactly where they're going to go. But a couple of things that are powerful for people listening: trying things you don't like. Admittedly, injury came before you
mhm,
expected it, but you were already stepping in and considering
mm.
trying things. Network and being aware of opportunities. The club were very good to you, but you will have put yourself out there to be deemed suitable for this opportunity. And then you've stepped into this entrepreneurial environment, which is very interesting because if there's an overarching theme of the last few months of us talking to so many athletes, is that there's a real desire for people to step into that
Mm.
entrepreneurial world. They've got ideas, very diverse ideas, but it's having the courage and the confidence to back themselves to get into that space. Because as
Yeah.
Carl alluded to earlier, the fear of the unknown often traps people playing longer than they really want to. The body's
Mm.
starting to fall apart, or they've just lost the love and the passion for it, but it's secure, it's what they know. And so hearing from guys like yourself that have said, actually, I'll set something up and I'll build a business, I think is really powerful. So
Mm.
in terms of attributes, I think it's probably a good place to start, Will. What sort of things that you had developed and honed in sport allow you to step in? I mean, you've been, I know you're self-deprecating, you like to talk, but that is a serious point. Communication is a facet that you need
Yeah.
in sport that you've taken into business. So tell us a little bit about some of the skills that you think, actually, this is what I developed and learned in sport, which have allowed me to step into this entrepreneurial
Mm.
space.
So yeah, so I've reflected on this quite a lot myself. and it's going to sound like it's not something I learned in sport, but an attribute, and in the most positive way you could say this word is ignorance.
Right.
So I think one of the biggest things that allowed me to start a business was blissful ignorance.
Right.
In that, because
Hmm.
I'd known sport and I had this idea and I knew this idea worked because it worked, and or the bones of it worked in this consultancy practice I'd set up for the club. I didn't know the business landscape. I didn't know markets. I just knew I had this idea. I'm good at it. I know how to build it out. Why not? And I think indirectly that is something through sport, right? Is if there's an opportunity, it's that opportunity cost of going, if I give it a go and it works, I get this. If I give it a go, it doesn't work, I get that. And being able to weigh that up. And I think the initial bit for me was the ignorance of kind of going, well, this idea massively outweighs if it doesn't work.
Hmm.
If I can get this going, it works. And yeah. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing for me, and I think this is why a lot of sports people go into running their own businesses or co-founding, whatever it is when you look at what is the reason you did this, what is the reason you played the sport if it's not the sport? Because you're never going to replicate European finals, you're never going to replicate playing in front of a packed out stadium. So what are the other things that drove you, that got you to that point? And inherently it's things like, in order to be picked, you have to be improving every single day. You've got to be challenging yourself physically and mentally. You've got to be learning as much as possible. You have the opportunity to do it with people that you genuinely love and care about. Um, and actually go, well, if that's what's important to me, then where else can I replicate that from a work point of view? And going and working for someone else doesn't necessarily give you those things. And whereas starting your own business does, because for your business to be successful, you've got to challenge yourself in every facet, more so than playing professional sport in many ways. You have to learn every day. You get the opportunity to build a team around you that you genuinely love and care about, that's going to see you succeed, right? And pressure. Part of, I think, this kind of massive pseudo, whatever the word is, way of thinking that sports people have, that actually we enjoy that pressure and everything comes with it. And actually starting a business, there's way more pressure on that than running out. If you lose a game, you lose a game. And if you lose a business, your mortgage is down the drain, you've got your family support, you've got,
Yeah.
so, but in a weird way, that's quite exciting in the backward way. So I think that's why, to your point, James, why you see a lot of sports people coming out of sport and going down that route, because it hits the same internal drivers that you got from playing the sport, whatever, irrelevant to what the sport was, right? It's
Yeah.
those drivers kind of remain. So I think it's those bits, and in terms of tangible things, I'm sure current sports people, former sports people listen to this have the same. I got told nearly my whole career, you've got so many transferable skills, la 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 la. And at the time I was like, oh, brilliant. Okay, cool. I'll be fine then. Like no dramas. And I finished and I was like, what the hell are these transferable skills? No one's told me what they are. Like I have no idea. I think the first invoice I sent to a client, I put the VAT bill at 17.5% because when I did GCSE business studies, that was what it was, right? And so I had no idea. But again, on reflection, at the back of it, and that ability to communicate and communicate in different scenarios and different situations and be able to kind of align and adapt to those situations. I think getting on with people, particularly in team sports, you've got a lot of people coming from different backgrounds, have different experiences, have different ways on views on winning, losing, whatever it might be. So being able to like align all of that and find your space within it. I think being able to deal with setbacks and challenges and being very pragmatic and objective about, well, what's the next step forward. And I think bringing people into, particularly if you're starting a business, bringing people into kind of without sounding a bit wanky with it, but bring them into kind of your vision, right? And
Yep.
your idea, but then also allowing them that space to either shoot it down or think, cool, well, have we thought of this or have we thought of that? So I think again, it's not exclusive to rugby. I think it's sports in general, I think gives you a lot of that, and you've grown up with it your entire life because people view your rugby as your professional career, your sport as your professional career, but you've been playing that sport since you were 8, 9, 10 years
Yeah.
old. So you've actually learned, it's your whole life, it's your whole way of being, is then just going, cool, well, how do we reframe this in a different context, but still taking those transferable elements, those tangible elements, and using them elsewhere.
No, I think that's really, really articulately put, Will. There's a lot of wisdom in there because people do often say, "What are these transferable skills?" But you've hit on a number of areas there that is relevant to any discipline, as you say.
Mm.
People are generally able to deal with pressure. I mean, again, it was an interesting anecdote from you at the start of this interview, talking about that
Mm.
emotion coming through you. But there is intense pressure for any athlete that's done it. They know to step into that goldfish bowl, to step into that pressure cooker, to have live TV cameras, live audiences,
Mm.
and then have it all dissected by pundits or social media comments, etc. There is a high level of resilience that people don't necessarily recognize, which will serve you well in industry.
Hmm.
I think that competitive animal that all athletes have within them, as you've alluded to there, it feeds well into this next step because you want to keep moving forward. As you've said, it's very much based in sport around physical competency, mental toughness, etc. But that desire to keep improving lends itself very well to entrepreneurship. The ability to deal with setbacks, you've touched on there, another really important one because nobody goes in a straight progression. There's
Mm.
always bumps in the road. You had a lot, 10 surgeries, an unbelievable number, but you keep coming back, you keep overcoming them. So that competitive will, that resilience, that ability to communicate, there'll be lots of people listening to this going, well, I've got a lot of that. Well, then actually, think about what your passion is, think about
Mm.
where you get excited and where you'd like to step into, because there's a lot already inside you that can serve you well when you go into that space.
Mm.
I think building on that point, well, another question we often like to ask is do's and don'ts,
Mm.
because we're big believers that, you are where you are in life for a reason. Don't regret anything. Everything's part of the learning process and that journey. But that being said, there will be young men and women who are still very much in that intense sporting bubble, casting their eyes forward, thinking about how do I step into the next chapter? How do I avoid the pitfalls? How do I build a plan that's going to take me to a happy and successful place? So hearing from people like you that have walked the walk, been down that path, I think is always very powerful. If you had to pull out a couple of do's and a couple of don'ts to enhance your likelihood of success when you come to hang up your proverbial
Mm.
boots, step out of your particular sport, what comes to mind, Will, having looked at your journey? What would you pass on as wisdom to those walking behind you to say, focus on doing this and try and avoid
Yeah.
doing that? What comes to mind in that regard?
Mm. I'd hesitate to call anything I say wisdom, but in terms of I say do's and don'ts. So I think the biggest thing I learned, or the quickest thing I learned when I finished playing was, and again, it's such an old cliche, but the whole, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I didn't appreciate actually how true that is. Because like anything, right, you can learn a job, you can upskill yourself, you can do all that sort of stuff. But it's how do you get yourself in a position to be offered that job or put yourself in a position to have that, and that is entirely network and connections and something that sport indirectly provides all of us. And so I think a do and a don't actually aligned is don't turn down the opportunities to meet new people when you're playing, because when you're playing, the leverage you've got to open up
Yeah.
conversations and relationships is huge. Even someone like myself that I got close, I got, I was picked for a couple of squads, but I never got an international cap. Um, and the amount of doors that were open to me, even as like a club player, was amazing. And I actively turned down a lot of opportunities I was playing because I was tired from training or my calf was a bit tight. I didn't want to risk, these things I look back on now and think, oh, that's mental. And it wasn't just that was a lot of, well, I'll say most of the guys, you actively turned the stuff down because it was seen as like an add-on, as a bit of a chore. And
Hmm.
um, but now looking back, it's like, wow, I've been fortunate enough with the people that I did connect with, but I missed a lot of opportunities. So to your point, to start, like I don't regret it because I don't believe there's a reason why you said no at the time, and that reason in that moment at that time was for you the right thing to do because that's why you did it.
Yes.
But in terms of do's, definitely leverage the fact that you're a professional sports person in the most real way. I'm not going to say authentic in that because again, that's a massively overused LinkedIn word, but in the most real way that you can, leverage that.
Yeah.
And leverage again is one of these words that has slightly negative connotations when you say it, but in the most positive way. So that's a do.
Yeah.
Don't turn down those opportunities. Unless obviously you've got a valid reason, then of course. But don't see it as like a longer term play because nothing will come from that conversation. Nothing will come from probably the 10 conversations subsequently. But the 11th and 12th, 13th, 14th conversation, when you're finished, that might be the person that connects you to someone else that then gives you a job or that helps you set up a business or that does that thing. So I think that there's a one big do and the one big don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're fabulous ones, Will. And funny enough, we spoke with Joe Jacobson recently, who
Mm,
spent 19 years playing professional football, and he said a very similar comment that he recognized the leverage that you had. It's the presence that you've got. There's all these
mm,
people in the sports stadium, in the corporate lounges that want to come and see you play. And he recognized that and talked about the benefit, not of exhausting yourself, as you say, when you've got an
mm.
injury or a tight calf, spending hours on your feet, but just going into a lounge, speaking to the sponsors,
Yeah.
engaging with them, exploring their knowledge, their journey. All of that wisdom is around you when
Mm.
you lift your head out of the immediate day-to-day interactions in the playing squad to say, just as a basic challenge, what can I learn from the
Yeah.
sponsors network that's around me, that's coming to this stadium every weekend and not see it as a chore? So I think
Yeah.
you've put something across there
I think
that's important.
with that as well, Jim, there's also, to your point, Will, of saying I wanted to dive into industries and find the no's so I could definitely count things
Mm.
out and find the yeses so I knew to explore them more. Again, while you're interacting with the sponsors, there's a reason why these companies are sponsoring your sport, and
Mm.
it's probably because they're a fan of the sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're in there interacting and you're asking about their world, you've got an opportunity there to dive into their world and see whether it's a yes or a no.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Just
And that's
ask the question, can I spend a
and
day with you?
and that's the next bit is then once you're there is asking questions and asking for help. I think a lot of the time and
Yeah.
that kind of acknowledging the ignorance in a good way, right? And that's why I'm
Yeah.
asking this because I actually don't know this. And it's
Yeah.
and people, yeah, you obviously get some scumbags, of course you do, but on the whole, people are very, very generous and very kind. And in when you're a professional sports person, it's a huge privilege, right? And I think often we see that as a reason not to ask for help or ask for things because I should know this because of the position I'm in. But actually, that privilege is hugely beneficial because it puts you in the room,
Yeah.
and it probably took me a little while as well. Of again, I almost had that element of well, I'm only here because of the club I played for, or I'm only here because of. So again, I was like, well, I don't want to ask the question because I'm grateful just to be here, type thing. I'm not going to now start asking for help or advice and that kind of stuff. But then that whole bit of going, well, yes, I'm privileged, but I have also earned it.
Yeah.
Like I have, yes, I've had a leg up on a ladder compared to a lot of people. I had a brilliant family, I have a brilliant upbringing, I've had all that amazing, amazing privilege, but I've also used it for good, right? And so it's that whole again that acceptance of well, actually, I'm allowed to ask.
Yeah.
I shouldn't, I don't have to know all this,
And that's a
um,
permission thing. Well, it's interesting because wearing
mm,
my other hat, coaching in the business sector and spending a lot of time with
mm,
leaders, we've almost got this inherent sort of people talk the modern vernacular now around imposter syndrome. And I don't want to ask, and what if people say no?
mm,
And I actually think sports people can break through a lot of this because the analogy
yeah,
I always use is when you're a junior player stepping into an elite sporting group, whether that's a club as you've been in, or whether that's a team, whether you're an Olympic team, it doesn't matter. There'll always be senior men and women who
hmm
have had experience and who are further down the track than you. And what do we do as junior players? We learn from them. We model them. We'll pick their brains on certain things. We'll ask them questions. It's a natural way of progressing in a sporting arena is look to the senior people who have been there and done that and ask them. So actually, we're familiar with that model. Now let's take it into life beyond sport. When we meet interesting people, different sponsors,
mm,
don't just ask the superficial, how are you? Great, nice to see you. Ask a little bit about what brought them to where they are. What are the lessons along the way? What's the biggest challenge they've ever faced? What would they do if they had the time again? Once you genuinely show interest in people, most people's ego will be flattered. Very few
yeah,
people are going to be turn around and say, why are you asking me? Most people are going to be flattered. And I see that in business a lot. The worst that can ever happen when you ask somebody for advice or insight is they say, I'm a bit busy at the minute, but come back to me, and they'll make time for you. I've never encountered anybody be offended by somebody approach them and try and tap into their knowledge and wisdom. So just having a look at the spread of sponsors and thinking about sectors that you're interested in and asking your commercial team or your marketing team within your organization to say, could you make an intro to me, and meeting them for a coffee? Something as simple as that will open up doors and help, to your earlier point. Now that I understand that a bit better, that's not really an area I think I want to explore. Or
100%.
now that I understand that better, I'm really passionate about this. Who else can I talk to? And use
100%.
that time while you're playing to learn more. So I think it's another really powerful reference point, I hope, of
Yeah.
people listening to
Our
go out
team,
and ask the questions.
our team psych always said to us, especially as junior players, to your point, Jim, like everything we need to know about being a professional rugby player is in this room.
Right.
Right. In a team meeting, everything I could possibly need to know about being a professional rugby player, playing for this club, is in the room, right? Because it's in everyone else. It's in the senior players, the coaches, the medics. The question is actually, can I access it? Can I actually get that bit of information? Which essentially is, can I go and ask the question? Do I have enough social capital with this person, enough of a connection to feel confident and comfortable to ask them, can you come review my loan club game from the weekend, whatever it might be?
Yeah.
And that's the point you're saying, right? And that's true once you've got everything you can need to know about stepping into what we still call kind of like the real world, or stepping into this industry, or what that transition looks like, whatever it is. It's out there. It's
Yeah.
in other people. The question is, can you go and access it?
Yes.
Can you find them? Can you find that person? Can you ask them the question? Can you then take on that answer and use it and apply it to kind of your situation?
And that's again, it very much squares a circle. Will, as you know, what we're trying to do here with ATA is to be part of that reference library. Everybody will find their own personal vibe. It might be a mentor, it might be a coach, it might be somebody within the business community, within their sporting organisation, or indeed out of it, or it may be somebody like us. That the access is all around us. We've just got to make the commitment to say, whilst I'm competing, I want to explore opportunities and ways to make my transition successful. And the important point is it's not an either or. Nobody has to commit to tens of hours every week, do things that physically exhaust them. But there is a lot of time in a working week for most sportsmen and women to say, I could have an hour's conversation there.
Yeah.
I could pick up the phone to someone. I could jump on a Zoom. I could sit and have a relaxed coffee with someone. I could do a training program. All of that is where we see the opportunity to remove fear and trepidation, to say, you perform and commit to being an elite sportsman as long as you want, but start investing in the transition. It will reduce the fear, it'll enhance your excitement, and then you make decisions on your terms. I think that's our mission in a nutshell, really, to allow people to make decisions on their terms. You want to sign a new deal? Sign it. You want to step off now and go somewhere else? Well, then step off. Don't get pushed down a path you don't want to be in. And I think people hearing the frustration, 10 surgeries while you were playing, being told there's no option, but then actually going into a business environment. It sounds a ridiculous question to say, Will, but you've been doing this for a few years. You've also got the foundation. Where's your level of fulfillment? I mean, obviously you don't do things you don't enjoy, but a lot of people think there'll never be any fulfillment. Once I stop playing, that's it. Nothing's going to be as good as this. But it's a very hard question to answer, but I'm still going to ask it nonetheless. Is how fulfilled do you find yourself now out of that elite sporting environment, but working in a business that helps people and with a foundation that really does genuinely take that help to another level?
Yeah. Yeah, what exactly saying, it's just different. And I think that's part of that transition process, right? Is understanding and accepting that life is forever changed. It's different, right? So you get your enjoyment from different areas, and a lot of it aligns to your personal lives as well. I after I finished playing, I got married and I've had two kids, right? So all of a sudden, your the intent with which you're doing everything is completely different.
Yeah.
When I was playing, it was me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was doing this for me. And then I met my now wife, and then obviously then she came and I'm doing it for us. And then you finish, you go right now. So from that point of view, that I'm as fulfilled, just in a very, very different way. Very
Yes.
different way. So the fulfillment from the business comes from I can now provide a half decent life for my family, right? And that's nice, stable, and so which is awesome. From then a work point of view, the fulfillment comes in the people I'm able to do it with. So I've been able to build a team of people that I genuinely love and care about, which again is tapping into the same stuff as the rugby. One of those people being Jacko, who obviously I played at Saracens with, Jackson Ray, just to name drop him.
Yeah.
And then the fulfillment is then actually seeing, again, same rugby, right? You train all week, you train all year to get to a certain goal and outcome, and you see that play out on the pitch. The business is no different, right? We're building a business and we're providing services, doing what we're doing to see an outcome, to see the client use the outcomes from the workshops, whatever, and be better for it.
Yeah.
And you see that. So again, it's all similar. And if you're going down to that kind of, I suppose, deep kind of fulfillment to your core, that's the foundation stuff, right? And you're going and we're working in prisons, we're working in pupil referral units, we're trying to help people from parts of our society that are largely, if not completely, forgotten about or unknown or people are unaware of. And actually trying to use the same premise by which we work with corporate clients, the same model in many ways, and putting it into demographics where you can generally have an impact on someone, right? And so to see some of the success stories that have come from that and lads coming out of prison and getting full-time employment, staying there, suddenly some of them earning really good money and having completely changed their lives around, it's awesome. It's brilliant. And again, the team that we have working the foundation are just fundamentally good human beings. So yeah, so I think to your question, 100% get as much fulfillment, if not more in many ways, because I have more fulfillment to gain because as I said, with family and bits like that. And I
Yeah.
think it's also this acceptance, I think, again, and it's almost impossible to see, again, the other side of it is you don't want to preach to current players, right? And like I was told loads, ignored it entirely. I'm sure most players do. There's a whole world out there, and there's a whole life after rugby or after football or hockey, whatever it is. You go, yeah, cool, great, but at the moment I'm a professional rugby player, so we do that. And I was exactly the same. But part of the transition is that realization that even if I'd played till 35, that's still hopefully my career is less than half of my life, or
Yeah.
playing rugby is less than half of my life. And that realization that, okay, so actually this next part of my life is going to be the majority.
Yeah.
So so it's a much more kind of longer term way of thinking. And I think that process in switching your head, getting your head around that, also then by definition changes where you get your fulfillment from
Yes.
and
Yeah,
how
no, I
it
think
manifests itself.
it's a great answer, Will, and again, I like simplicity. And there's that old adage that common sense isn't always common practice.
Mm,
So I think every player listening, particularly the younger generation, without sounding like an old man, we all feel and remember those times when you feel you're invincible.
mm,
And there's a lot of themes with the guests on this podcast. There's repetition, but I think that's important because repetition then hopefully it'll become adopted practice. Because I think pretty much everybody who's come on said, yeah. I'd heard advice. I'd been told about, as you said, the big
mm,
world out there, network, develop, but then you focus back on the here and now.
mm,
So if enough people are saying, actually, if I wound the clock back, I would be a bit more focused about what comes next, because to your other comment there, this chapter will always be longer. Even if you'd have got to 35,
mm.
very few people are blessed to be in a sporting sector. They can retire at 35 and that's it. And this fulfillment question is important to me because something Carl and I often comment about and share with people is this question of who says your sporting chapter has to be the best one.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
there's fulfillment there, but it's different, as you've said.
Mm,
You can find deeper pots of fulfillment in different areas, but ultimately that buzz of building something and contributing, that's
mm.
all there. And all the things you've talked about, working with great human beings, communicating, making a difference in what you do, it's all there to be shot at. So, Will, it's been fabulous talking to you. There's a whole raft of insights that you've shared. In terms of people who will be genuinely, I'm sure, intrigued about what you do in the foundation, etc., where's the best place for people to find you? What's the best way to find Will?
So obviously website's a good place to start. So 101st.com. So the number 100 words and first.com. Social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, and then 101st Foundation is the same. Just obviously add on the word foundation without, teaching everyone how to suck eggs. And that's it really. Yeah, have a look. If anyone's interested, then obviously please reach out. But yeah, it's been a joy talking to you both.
Great. Will,
Awesome.
we thank you very much for your time. I know we're going to be doing things together in the future. I think people will have benefited greatly from your story. And I think that fulfillment question is a great place to finish, because there'll be other people who unfortunately hit that barrier, that brick wall that you did of injury, and then they hear the journey you've gone on subsequently. And I hope that will inspire people to step forward with confidence and do the same. So Thanks very much, Will. Pleasure talking to you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Will.
Guys.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insight, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.